When viewers tuned into American Bandstand, they saw a world that looked picture perfect. Teenagers with flawless smiles, dresses that twirled effortlessly, and dance steps that felt as natural as breathing. But what the camera captured was only a thin layer of the truth. Behind that glowing screen was a world far smaller, louder, hotter, and far more complicated than America ever imagined. The original studio at 46th and Market Street in Philadelphia was barely big enough to hold a few hundred people, yet somehow it became the birthplace of a cultural phenomenon. Teenagers lined up outside hours before the doors opened, hoping for just a single chance to step inside. For the regulars, the chosen few who danced almost every day, that cramped space wasn't just a studio. It was their stage, their social world, and in many ways, their entire universe. Inside, everything felt larger than life. The lights were blinding. The music pounded so hard you felt it in your ribs. Camera cables snaked along the floors. Assistants weaved through the crowds. Teenagers squeezed shoulder to shoulder, fighting for a patch of floor where they might be seen. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, a handful of kids, barely 14, 15, 16 years old, became household names. Being a regular meant fame in the strangest sense. They weren't actors, singers, or professional dancers. They were ordinary Philadelphia kids who suddenly found themselves recognized on sidewalks, mobbed at record stores, and receiving fan mail from strangers across the country. America watched them dance day after day, convinced they knew these teens intimately. But behind the curtain, in those narrow hallways and overheated rooms, were stories the public never saw. Stories of friendship, envy, whispered secrets, and fragile teenage emotions unfolding under the weight of sudden fame. And as the decade progressed, the contrast between the polished smiles on air and the reality behind the camera grew only sharper. What really happened when the music stopped? Who got along and who didn't? What rivalries simmered just out of frame? And what secrets were carefully hidden to protect the wholesome image the nation adored? To answer those questions, we have to step past the cameras, squeeze into that crowded studio, and look at what life was truly like for the Philadelphia regulars, the young stars who danced their way into America's heart. Behind the bright lights and cheerful music, the world of the Philadelphia regulars operated on invisible currents, alliances, friendships, crushes, and rivalries that shaped everything from who danced with whom to who stood where when the camera swung across the floor. To the millions watching at home, the teens appeared united, a single joyful crowd moving in perfect rhythm. But among the regulars, every glance, every pairing, every position on the dance floor carried meaning. Some friendships seemed carved in stone. Justine Carrelli and Frani Giordano were inseparable, often arriving together, fixing each other's hair and whispering before the music started. Arlene Sullivan naturally slipped into the role of big sister, the calm, grounded presence whom many dancers turned to when drama flared. Meanwhile, Carmen Jimenez and Paula Copico formed their own tight duo, two stylish, confident girls who navigated the spotlight with ease and pride. And then there were the pairings America adored. Justine and Bob Clayton became the nation's golden couple, even though off-camera their relationship was far more complicated, more friendship than romance. Their elegance on the floor made people believe in a love story that never fully existed. Arlene Sullivan and Kenny Rossi, on the other hand, shared a connection that felt deeper than a teenage crush, part friendship, part emotional partnership, a bond that puzzled even them. They were magnetic together, yet neither claimed they were ever truly dating. To this day, fans still debate what their relationship meant, but with popularity came tension. Teenagers rarely admit it, but envy grows quickly in small spaces, and the bandstand studio was very small. The regulars noticed who the camera favored. They knew who received more fan mail. They felt when someone suddenly became the it couple, pushing others to the edges of the frame. Alliances naturally formed, small groups who defended each other, whispered advice, traded secrets, or complained quietly when someone else seemed too hungry for attention. Pat Molittieri became one of the most polarizing figures. Bold, ambitious, full of personality, she could charm a room and steal the spotlight without trying. Some admired her confidence, others felt overshadowed by it. When Pat switched partners, dancing one day with Lou Salino, the next with Billy Cook or Bobby Burgess, people whispered, Was it flirtation, strategy, or simply the fun of being young, talented, and adored? These unofficial sides didn't function like enemies, but rather like mini-communities, each with its own vibe. Some groups preferred chatting by the record booth, others clustered near the studio door. Some stayed quiet and cautious, others gossiped openly. Yet all of them shared something rare, the knowledge that they were living through a moment unlike anything their classmates outside could understand. And because they were teenagers, emotions ran high. A misunderstood comment could turn into weeks of cold shoulders. A stolen dance partner could ignite jealousy. A shared secret could bond two kids for life. The studio wasn't just a workplace. It was a pressure cooker of adolescence, friendship, hormones, and unexpected fame. But as complex as these relationships were, they only set the stage for the unspoken competition that defined daily life on American Bandstand. The battle to become Dick Clark's next favorite couple. Long before social media, long before reality TV crowned its first winners, American Bandstand created something no other show had. The concept of teenage celebrities chosen not by judges, but by the camera itself. And in the late 1950s, nothing mattered more to a regular than becoming one of Dick Clark's favorite couples. It wasn't an official title. There were no lists, no announcements, no trophies. Yet every regular understood its importance. When Dick Clark liked your style, your smoothness on the dance floor, your clean-cut look, your chemistry with your partner, the camera followed you. And when the camera followed you, America followed too. This invisible hierarchy shaped everything. Justine Carrelli and Bob Clayton held the throne early on. Their elegance, calmness, and unforced charm matched perfectly with the polished image the show needed. They didn't push, didn't brag, didn't demand space. They simply danced beautifully, and the nation fell in love. The camera adored them, and so did Dick Clark. But another duo soon rose to legendary status, Arlene Sullivan and Kenny Rossi. Their energy, connection, and rhythm made them mesmerizing in a way no one else could replicate. They weren't pretending to be anyone else. Their authenticity was their magic. When Arlene and Kenny glided across the floor together, other dancers instinctively stepped back, not out of fear, but out of recognition. This was a pair meant for the spotlight. Yet with every favorite couple crowned by the camera, a wave of quiet competition rippled across the studio. Some dancers admitted, years later, that they knew exactly where the cameras rotated and tried to position themselves nearby. Others strategized, wearing brighter outfits, perfecting signature dance moves, or choosing partners who complemented their style. It wasn't malicious. It was survival, or perhaps more accurately, the natural hunger of teenagers trying to stand out in a room full of stars. There were rumors, always whispered and never confirmed, that Dick Clark occasionally nudged certain dancers to the front or advised them to stick with specific partners. Not because he played favorites out of personal bias, but because he understood television. He knew who looked right, who matched the tempo of the show, who embodied the wholesome image America expected. As a result, being overlooked by the camera felt like a small heartbreak. Some dancers took it personally, others shrugged it off. A few quietly left the show after weeks of fading into the background. But those who thrived, the ones who learned how to catch the camera's eye without forcing it, became legends. And with every dance, with every spin, with every song played over the loudspeakers, the unspoken contest continued. Teens smiled on screen, but their minds were ticking beneath the surface. Are we being filmed right now? Did we get enough airtime today? Does Dick seem to like this pairing more? But fame is never simple, and the closer you get to the spotlight, the more shadows you cast. Because where there is competition, there is tension, and where there is tension, drama is never far behind. Next came misunderstandings, jealousy, and clashes that could turn a friendly dance floor into a battleground of teenage emotions. And that is where the real story of the Philly regulars begins to heat up. On television, the regulars floated across the dance floor with effortless grace, smiling, laughing, moving as if the studio were a place untouched by conflict. But behind the scenes, the air often crackled with tension. These were teenagers, after all, living inside a pressure cooker of fame, hormones, and expectations. The show demanded perfection, but reality delivered something far more complicated. One of the biggest sources of conflict was simple: jealousy. Jealousy over camera time, fan mail, partners, friendships, even hairstyles. A dancer who received a sudden surge of attention would feel eyes on them, not all of them friendly. A new dress that turned heads might inspire admiration in some, resentment in others. And when someone began consistently appearing in the prime camera zone, the quiet murmurs began, "She's blocking on purpose. He only dances with her because Dick likes them together. Why is she suddenly acting like she owns the floor?" No one embodied this tension more than Pat Molittieri, Pat Molittieri. Brilliant, confident, and a natural performer, Pat drew attention without trying. Her smile lit up the room, her charisma was undeniable, but that same charisma made her a lightning rod for drama. Some regulars adored her, others felt overshadowed. She changed dance partners often, Lou Salino, Billy Cook, Frank Levins, even Bobby Burgess, and each new pairing sparked whispers. Some girls felt she was stepping into their territory. Some boys felt intimidated by her boldness, and a few thought she enjoyed the spotlight a little too much. But Pat wasn't the only flashpoint. A dancer might save a particular record for a close friend, only for another regular to swoop in and grab it. A misinterpreted glance could spiral into days of tension. If someone's partner danced with another person, even for a single song, awkwardness could settle into the room like dust. Teenagers felt everything intensely, and Bandstand magnified those emotions to impossible scale. There were stories of dancers crying in stairwells after arguments, of whispered apologies between songs, of friendships cooling for weeks because of a single misunderstanding on the floor. And then there were the rare but unforgettable blow-ups, heated words exchanged near the studio door, moments that staff members stepped in to calm but never allowed to reach the public. Yet, some of the deepest drama wasn't loud at all. It was quiet, subtle, unfolding in the small gestures only the regulars themselves noticed. A girl refusing to meet another's eye. A boy choosing a different dance partner without warning. Two dancers suddenly avoiding being filmed near each other. These minor shifts could reshape the entire studio dynamic. But perhaps the most dramatic moment of all came when secret frustrations clashed directly with the show's ironclad rules, especially when a regular crossed the line that Dick Clark had drawn to protect the wholesome image of American Bandstand. And no story captures that better than what happened to Pat Molittieri in the summer of 1959. Because when ambition, honesty, and teenage emotion collided with strict television policy, the consequences were felt across the entire studio. Television in the late 1950s lived under a strict code of innocence. American Bandstand sold a dream. Clean-cut teenagers dancing, laughing, and showing America what good youth looked like. Dick Clark knew the power of that image, and he protected it fiercely. To maintain the show's reputation, there were rules, some written and some silently understood. Regulars could not profit from their fame. They could not endorse products. They could not give interviews without approval. They could not reveal what truly happened behind the scenes. Breaking any of these rules meant trouble. Breaking them publicly meant disaster. And that is exactly what happened to Pat Molittieri, Pat Molittieri. Pat was a star, maybe too bright for her own good. Fans adored her polished style and expressive dancing. Teen magazines printed her photos constantly. She had her own fan club and a level of charisma that could fill the room. But Pat was also a writer at heart. She had opinions, insights, and a passion for telling stories. And in 1959, she did something no regular had dared to do. She wrote about Bandstand for Teen magazine. It wasn't scandalous gossip. It wasn't malicious. But it broke the one rule Dick Clark considered sacred. Regulars could not commercialize their fame. When the issue hit newsstands, the reaction behind the scenes was immediate and severe. Dick Clark, normally calm and measured, called Pat in. She wasn't scolded, she was removed. Just like that. On June 24, 1959, Pat walked out of the bandstand doors for the last time. The shock inside the studio was enormous. Some dancers cried, some whispered that she had been treated unfairly, others quietly feared they might be next. For weeks, the regulars stepped more carefully. Their smiles were just as bright on screen, but inside, they all felt the weight of Pat's absence. Many said later that the mood in the studio changed that summer. Something warm, fun, and carefree had cracked. But Pat's story wasn't the only scandal hidden from the audience. Several dancers were briefly suspended for arriving late, arguing on the floor, or violating the no dating drama on camera rule. A few boys were warned about smoking behind the studio. One regular was told not to come back for a month after a loud argument that nearly spilled onto the dance floor during a commercial break. There were romances that ended badly, creating icy atmospheres on set. There were girls who refused to dance if a rival couple was placed in front of them. There were feuds over dresses, shoes, makeup, and most of all, over which couple the camera preferred. Yet none of this ever reached the public. To viewers at home, Bandstand remained a perfect bubble, polite, wholesome, harmonious. But the regulars lived the truth, a truth filled with rules, pressure, heartbreak, mistakes, and the difficult lesson every teenager eventually learns. Growing up is messy even when America's watching. And amid all the mess, one thing still held them together: the emotions they shared, the friendships they built, and the raw, vulnerable tenderness of being young in a world that demanded perfection. Next came the stories of real love, real friendships, and real heartbreak. The moments that shaped these teens long after the show ended. For all the conflicts, jealousies, and unspoken rivalries, what truly defined the Philadelphia Regulars wasn't drama, it was emotion. Raw, innocent, overwhelming teenage emotion. Behind the polished studio floor, the girls and boys who captivated America were still just kids learning how to love, how to trust, and how to navigate friendships in a world that expected them to act older than they were. Inside the studio, romance flickered in unexpected ways. Some crushes lasted a week, others lasted years. There were couples who danced like soulmates, yet insisted they were just friends, and couples who dated quietly while the world assumed they were strangers. Every day felt like a small emotional adventure, a lingering glance across the floor, a shared laugh during a commercial break, a hand held just a moment longer than necessary during a slow dance. Arlene Sullivan and Rossi shared a connection that defied labels. They weren't officially together, and yet together they created something unforgettable. Their chemistry wasn't scripted or manufactured, it was simply there. Even decades later, both spoke of each other with a tenderness that suggested a bond beyond teenage romance, something rooted in mutual respect and deep emotional resonance. Justine Carrelli and Bob Clayton, America's golden couple, were never the passionate love story fans imagined. Their connection was gentle, comfortable, almost peaceful, a friendship wrapped in rhythm. Off camera, they confided in each other, laughed at the absurdities of sudden fame, and protected one another from pressure neither of them had asked for. In many ways, they survived because they didn't pretend to be more than they were. And then, there were the quieter friendships, the ones the camera never captured but shaped lives profoundly. Frani Giordano and Carmen Jimenez supported each other through heartbreaks, school stresses, and the emotional chaos of adolescence. Paula Copico shared secrets with dancers she trusted more than classmates she had known for years. These were friendships built not on convenience, but on shared experience, the kind only a small group of teens living inside a cultural phenomenon could understand. Of course, not every relationship was bittersweet or poetic. Some were messy. Some ended abruptly. A dancer might arrive one morning glowing with happiness, only to dance alone the next day after a painful breakup. Tears were shed in stairwells, comforting words whispered between songs, long walks home taken in silence after a misunderstanding that felt world-ending at age 16. Yet, for all the heartache, those emotions were real, and they mattered. Because long after the show ended, long after the lights dimmed and the music stopped playing, many of these dancers carried the memories with them for life. Some remained friends for decades. Some lost touch but never forgot each other. Some carried regrets. Others carried warmth. Being a regular wasn't just about fame or dancing or being recognized on the street. It was about growing up together under impossible circumstances. It was about finding human connection in a whirlwind of attention, pressure, and opportunity. It was about discovering who they were and who they weren't in front of millions. And it was those emotions, those fragile and unforgettable moments, that would eventually reveal the deeper truth behind their story. Fame fades, spotlights dim, but the bonds formed in those crowded hallways and overheated studios, those survive. And yet, the regulars also carried something darker, the pressure of perfection and the loneliness that came with being adored by strangers. For millions of viewers across America, the regulars appeared to be the luckiest teenagers alive, admired, adored, and invited into living rooms every afternoon. But the glow of early fame has a way of casting long shadows, and behind those bright bandstand smiles were anxieties and insecurities few people ever saw. Most of the regulars were no older than 16. They were still juggling homework, curfews, and strict parents. Some came from modest neighborhoods, others from complicated family situations. Schoolmates treated them differently, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with jealousy. Teachers often didn't know what to make of their sudden celebrity. And fans wrote letters filled with praise, but also criticism, judgment, and expectations no teenager could ever fulfill. The pressure to remain perfect, polite, cheerful, well-dressed, well-behaved, weighed heavily on many of them. A single misstep, a moment of bad mood, even a minor wardrobe mistake could spark whispers inside the studio or comments from viewers. Some dancers felt they were constantly performing even when the cameras stopped. Justine Carrelli, beloved for her poise, once admitted she felt guilty on days she didn't appear on the show, as if she were letting fans down. Arlene Sullivan carried herself like the steady older sister of the group, but behind her calm exterior was a teenager trying to navigate heartbreaks, school pressures, and the responsibility of being a role model to thousands of girls. For others, the emotional weight was even heavier. Pat Molittieri, with her vibrant personality and unmistakable charm, felt misunderstood by some regulars and overwhelmed by the scrutiny that followed her every move. Her sudden removal from the show left a lasting mark, not just on her, but on everyone who watched her walk away. It was a reminder that fame could vanish in an instant. Some dancers dealt with loneliness in unexpected ways. They could be surrounded by hundreds of cheering fans and still feel isolated. They could dance next to their closest friends and still carry silent worries no one noticed. Fame had placed them on a pedestal, but it also separated them from their classmates, from their old lives, sometimes even from themselves. And yet, through all the pressure and expectation, the regulars kept dancing. They kept smiling. They kept showing up, even on days when their hearts were heavy or their confidence wavering. Because Bandstand wasn't just a show, it was their sanctuary, their escape, their second home. The dance floor became a place where they could lose themselves for 3 minutes at a time, forgetting the weight of being watched by an entire nation. But time was moving faster than they realized. They were growing up. Graduation loomed. Jobs, college, military service, marriages, and responsibilities were waiting just beyond the studio doors. The magic could not last forever, and deep down, they all knew it. Sooner or later, every regular had to face the hardest part of all. What happens when the music stops, and the applause fades, and you are no longer the star America remembers? In the end, the story of the Philadelphia regulars is not just about fame or television or the glittering illusion of perfection. It is about a group of kids who stepped onto a dance floor and found themselves swept into history before they were old enough to understand what that meant. They danced through joy, rivalry, heartbreak, and pressure, all beneath the glow of studio lights that made them appear larger than life. But time has a way of softening the sharp edges of the past. The jealousies, the whispered dramas, the scramble for camera space, those moments faded long ago. What remains are the memories, the friendships that shaped their youth, the songs that carried them through emotional storms, the feeling of being part of something extraordinary at an age when most teenagers are still figuring out who they are. For many regulars, the show became a chapter they carried with them into adulthood, sometimes proudly, sometimes privately. Some stayed in touch for decades, some drifted apart, but kept fond memories tucked away like old photographs. Some went on to build families, careers, and lives far removed from the world that once knew their names. And yet, whenever a song from those years plays, a piece of them returns to that crowded studio. The warmth of the lights, the hum of the cameras, the thump of a record spinning under teenage feet. What makes their story endure is not the fame they found, but the humanity beneath it. They were real teens with real emotions, doing their best to navigate a world far bigger than they expected. Their smiles were genuine, their friendships imperfect, their struggles honest. And it is that authenticity, not the spotlight, that keeps their legacy alive. Decades later, fans still wonder who loved whom, who stayed friends, who carried regrets, and who cherished the memories. The truth is simple. The regulars lived through a moment that could never be recreated. A moment shaped by music, youth, innocence, and a country falling in love with television. Their secrets weren't scandals or betrayals. They were the quiet realities of growing up, magnified by fame and preserved in black and white forever. And perhaps that is why we still look back, still feel drawn to their stories. Because behind every perfect dance step was a beating heart. Behind every smile was a real young soul finding its place in the world. And behind every moment on screen was a truth that only they fully understood. The music has long stopped, the cameras have long gone dark, but the legacy of the Philly regulars, the friendships, the hidden struggles, the unforgettable bonds, still dances on.